crew of 3 flies into space. They were not expecting a fourth, but once they get one, it presents a problem with oxygen. Drastic measures will need to be taken if they are to survive on their way to Mars. Several astronauts sit in a space shuttle, getting ready to launch into outer space. When they take off, the leader of the crew asks Hyperion if they should abort. He tells her not to, and then they fly much faster. Once in outer space, they travel at a comfortable speed while observing Earth from a window. Then they see a space station ahead of them. After that, they soon connect to it and acquire gravity. Then they make their way in the shuttle and start doing some work. Zoe comes to David and asks him how he's feeling because he felt unwell earlier, but he tells her he's okay. Then Zoe enters a room where she opens the window to look at Earth. When they all drink together, David states that 5 hours are down and 2 more years to go. All 3 of them then gather and talk about the mission to unseen personnel over a monitor. The leader, Marina, states that it's her final and 3rd mission. Then Zoe remarks about it being a life-changing experience. While she speaks, we see her at another time how she runs on the treadmill. She also says that this is an opportunity to give her life meaning beyond anything she could imagine. After her, David starts talking. He says that it takes a while to adjust to artificial gravity. Then he says that they are close to being able to call Mars a second home. Later, Marina finds some blood on the floor under the life support. She unlinks the hatch and discovers an unconscious man there. When she brings him down, he falls on her arm and hurts her. She tries to move him off, but cannot. The other 2 then come to her aid. They move him off and then carry him to the infirmary. While Zoe and David tend to the man, Marina observes a small opening in the roof. This prompts her to leave the room and shut the door. After that, she looks at the PSI reading. She later finds and collects the injured man's ID. Shortly after, Marina describes the situation to a man named Jim. Then she asks who is the man they found and whether he is a threat in need of restraining. We then see Zoe telling David that she's surprised the man is still alive. When they are all together, Marina says the man is Michael Adams from Launch Support. Afterward, Zoe tends to Marina's wound and tells her it could take about 6 weeks to heal. After a while, Michael wakes up. He walks around for a short time and then sits. Then he enters the room where he sees Earth from the window and becomes shocked. Soon enough, Zoe comes to him and assures him he is safe. She also tells him to sit down while she yells for Marina. Michael then asks her if they took off. With all 3 of them then, Zoe instructs Michael how to breathe. Marina introduces herself to him as the commander. Then she asks him if he works for Hyperion. He answers that he does. He also states to not remember what happened to him and then asks for how long he was out. Marina tells him they took off 12 hours ago, and he starts telling them that he has to get back to his sister, but they tell him he cannot. This causes the man to plead to be returned, understanding that this is a 2-year mission. Marina, however, tells him they don't have enough fuel to return. Later on, the 3 crew members sit and eat. Then Michael presents himself. Zoe and David come to him to help the man sit down. Marina tells him that she spoke to Hyperion about his sister and they will cover every expense for her. Michael then apologizes for how he lost his comm earlier. He also says he could do some work around the ship. Then in bed, Zoe and David discuss what to do with Michael. After their waking, Zoe explains some ship protocols to Michael as they go from room to room. Then she takes him to her favorite room, the one where Earth is seen through the window. He looks at it in awe and Zoe asks what his sister's name is. He tells her it's Ava. Then she asks if it's just the 2 of them and Michael says that it is. Afterward, we see him sleeping in the fitness room. When he awakens, he does data entry with David. He starts laughing as they do it and David questions him about it. And Michael asks what the music they're listening to is. He gets told that it's jazz and that it helps David get through this monotonous job. He adds that the genre is unpredictable but still has rules. Following that, we see Zoe in a spacesuit while Marina dictates to her what to inspect in some area of the ship. Zoe looks at it and reports there must have been a short circuit. Then she takes a picture and Marina looks at it. Afterward, Marina calls Hyperion and says they have a damaged life support assembly. She states it must get fixed. Then she comes to David and says she wants to talk to him. When they meet in another room, she asks him how much O2 his rack produces. When he tells her it's 90 liters a day, she asks him if he could get it up to 950 liters. David gives a negative to that. He then states he can do that with algae that can only be opened on Mars. Furthermore, he says all the gear he needs was already flown there. Then he asks her what happened, whether they lost the CDRA, and Marina says she's not sure. She asks him if there is anything else he can try. He says he can grow them here, but that could risk ruining the entire culture. However, he says he could use half of the algae and Marina agrees to it and tells him to focus on that. Before he leaves, she tells him that Zoe and Michael don't need to know this yet. We then see Michael and Zoe in spacesuits. They soon get to work in the room that requires them. Meanwhile, David goes to work on what Marina instructed him to do. Zoe then removes a unit and gives it to Michael to place down. She sees outer space as a result of removing it. After that, they leave the room and remove their spacesuits. Zoe notices some blood on Michael's shirt and tends to his wound shortly after. Following that, David and Marina talk about the situation some more. She tells him there is no chance of fixing the CDRA. He tells her he understands before he leaves. David then enters his lab and continues with his work. Later, Michael talks to Ava using his tablet. He tells her about his experience of being on the ship and part of the crew. When David enters the lab again, he notices that an entire rack of containers went from green to light brown. And then Marina talks to Jim about their dire situation. She looks almost defeated. In the next scene, Marina and David inform Zoe of the situation. Marina tells her they only have enough oxygen on the ship for 3 people, thanks to David. She adds that they are forced to let go of Michael. David then tries to propose a solution, but Marina says that will only give them days of oxygen and not months. Zoe then proposes something as well, and Marina states she cannot risk their lives for Michael. She says she will try to talk to him today. And then she says they have about 20 days until the presence of a 4th person becomes a problem. But Zoe disagrees severely about letting Michael go. Marina then says they will give him 10 days. And Zoe asks what will they say to Michael in the meantime. After that, Michael asks David how his assignment is going, and David, with an uneasy conscience, says it's fine. Then with Marina in the lab, David tells her they're endangering themselves. He says the longer they take, the harder it will become when they have to act. Afterward, we see Zoe tending to Michael's wound. Due to the burn on his torso, he starts telling her he was in an apartment fire when he was 9 years old. He tells her that at that time his sister was just a baby and his father managed to get them out. Zoe then asks if his father made it out, and Michael tells her he didn't. He follows it by showing her a bracelet that Ava gave him. Furthermore, he states he became her legal guardian and that it's really hard for him to not be there for her. Subsequently, Zoe cries when alone on her bed. Next, we see David struggling somewhat as well. He takes some materials out from a container and leaves with them. Then he comes to Michael and informs him of the trouble they are in. This leads Michael to ask if they can figure anything out, and David tells him they cannot. He then places the material he collected near Michael and says it will be painless. He adds that Michael would just fall asleep. Before leaving, David apologizes to him. After that, we see Michael crying uncontrollably. He looks at his bracelet and then at the injecting device. Quite later, he records another video message to Ava. While he speaks, we see how the other members are devastated. When the man says goodbye to his sister, he does not tell her the horrible news. At some other time, Zoe comes to Michael and notices the lethal device near him. She sits close to him and tells him he doesn't have to do this. Then she tells him a story about how she was trying to save a drowning man. She says that as she was holding onto him, eventually someone else came and pulled both of them out. Michael asks her how she knew someone was coming, and Zoe answers that she didn't. She adds that they got time and that she's not giving up on him. Michael then gives her the device. Following that, Zoe comes to David and asks him with some attitude about what he did, and he tries telling her with a similar attitude that he's trying to save them. He then says that Michael lost his life the moment they took off. Furthermore, he states that he gave up his work to try and save him, and then he questions what she did. The next scene has Zoe teaching Michael how to climb by using certain equipment, but then he falls. Zoe then comes to Marina and David in the lab. She tells them that climbing the tether puts them at risk, but she believes they should be doing that. She then asks David if he could help her because Michael can't climb it. Surprisingly to her, David quickly says he will. He then shows her that the other rack of containers is now also a light brown instead of green. Later, Zoe and David are wearing spacesuits, prepared to go into space. David tries saying something to Michael, but he tells David that they're good. Then the duo climbs out into outer space. As they walk there, Marina dictates to them what they should do. Soon, they start climbing the tether. After some climbing, they take a break because David needs it. Then the duo climbs without the equipment when the gravity goes away. When they reach the halfway point, Marina tells them to stay away from the panels or else they could lose power to the ship permanently. Eventually, they reach the Kingfisher and report being on it. They use a rope to get Zoe down. When she gets to a hatch, she opens it and it rapidly flies off into space. Then Zoe enters the opening and Marina tells her that she's looking for a liquid oxygen pipe. Zoe soon finds it and places a pressure gauge on it. Then she starts checking the amount of oxygen. When it reaches 250, she says they have enough for 1 cylinder. And when it reaches 500, Zoe says they have enough oxygen for everyone. Marina is then relieved and Michael cheers. David lowers a cylinder and Zoe takes it to start filling it. When she fills it, David collects the cylinder and sends down the second one. As Zoe starts filling the second one, an alarm goes off. Marina informs them they are getting a solar storm warning. She follows it by telling them to abort and that they have about 20 minutes left. David then tells Zoe they have to go, but she hesitates for Michael's sake. But Marina tells her the radiation will be deadly and they should head back now. This prompts Zoe to climb out. The duo then attaches the cylinder to themselves and climbs the tether. When Zoe passes the solar panel, she starts sliding down fast and cannot fasten herself. So she falls onto the ship and the cylinder flies into space. David soon comes to her and she tells him what happened. The 4 of them then sit inside the ship distraught. Then David says there is still another cylinder there, and if they can collect it, then 3 of them can survive. Marina states that the storm is going to last for hours. Then Michael says he can go out there, but Marina says he does not have the training. After sitting in silence for some time, David says that he will go. However, Zoe quickly intervenes and states it will be her. Shortly after, she gets into her spacesuit. When she stands outside of the ship, she gets affected by the solar storm. Zoe then climbs the tether again and returns to the cylinder. She carries it back and returns to the ship with radiation damage. Next, she places the cylinder inside while remaining outside the ship herself. What follows is Zoe sitting and staring into space in her final moment. Her voiceover then starts playing the statement she made earlier, how this is a rare opportunity that will give her life meaning beyond anything she could imagine.